Welcome to the You at Your Best podcast. I'm your host, Morgan. Before we get into the episode, let me give a little bit of an introduction for anyone who's new. If you like listening to someone process life in real time, or you are neurodivergent, an overthinker, a perfectionist, or maybe feel things deeply, this is the podcast for you. This is a non-professional, very human podcast about choosing authenticity over performance. My goal is to remind you to always come back to yourself. I talk about very deep things. I don't avoid vulnerability, but I trust you to know what resonates, what feels safe, and what might be too much for you right now. And I also share a journal prompt at the end of every single episode to help you think. So join me if you want to create a life that actually feels like you, so that you can become you at your best. All right, let's go ahead and get into this week's episode. Welcome back. I hope you're doing well. So this week's episode is the insight episode to last week's reflection. For anyone who's new here, I usually release 3 or 4 episodes a month. The first episode is always a reflection episode. The second one is an insight episode inspired by the reflection. It's kind of like a part 1 and a part 2, but you definitely don't have to listen to both to understand them. You can listen to one or the other, or you can listen to both. Then the last 1 or 2 episodes of the month are more fun and lighthearted and kind of just whatever I want to talk about. I added those episodes to give myself freedom so that I don't feel caged by my podcast. And then after that, I take a week off to plan the next month's episodes and spend time living my actual life so that when I do come back, I feel like I genuinely have something to talk about, rather than constantly trying to create content, even if it doesn't feel right. So last week's episode was all about integration, basically when the different parts of yourself stop fighting each other and finally start to make sense as one whole person. In that episode, I talked a little bit about how I used to constantly restart my podcast. That was kind of like a part of my process. But for this episode, I want to talk about whenever starting over is actually a form of avoidance. So I think social media has convinced us that whenever life feels hard, the answer to all of our problems is to just start over, like get a new job, a new routine, a new planner, a new aesthetic, move to a new city, get a new partner, a new identity. Sometimes that's exactly what we need. And this episode isn't me saying that starting over is always bad, because it's not. But other times we're restarting because we're trying not to face something. And also, this episode isn't to shame you or make you feel bad about past mistakes. This episode is just about learning how to tell the difference before you make your decision from now on, and kind of looking back at those past mistakes with curiosity instead of with shame. So for a lot of us, starting over feels so good. I am someone who all the time I want to buy a new journal to restart my journal even before I finished my old one, or wanting to buy new makeup before I finish the makeup that I already had, or wanting to buy more books before I finish all of the books that I have. And we also do this in things like moving. A lot of us, if we're wanting to move on from a place, we find a new place. There's a lot of people who get a new job over and over again, and every time they quit a job, it's because that other place was toxic, and then they go back to another toxic environment, almost like never really noticing. And we do it because it feels good. A fresh start is helpful. It helps us understand ourselves better sometimes. It really is good for us, and it feels like a breath of fresh air almost. And it isn't happening because we're lazy. It's because starting over gives us this hope that we will have better. And if you've struggled a lot, or if you've had a hard time, it feels a lot easier to restart because it gives you that hope that maybe one day things will get better. A new beginning often feels like, I'll do it right this time. This version of me won't fail. This time it'll be different. That's why restarting can almost become addictive. It's addiction to avoidance. But what we're actually trying to escape a lot of the time is different for everyone. Not everyone restarts for the same reason. It could be because of shame, fear of failure, fear of vulnerability, fear of what people might think about you, or trying to avoid other people's opinions. It can be grief. Sometimes we feel so much grief in one place that we're at that we need to move on to another one. Sometimes it's perfectionism and this need to have the most picture perfect life or the most picture perfect experience, like needing to buy new clothes every time we go somewhere or every time we go on vacation because we need to feel like we look perfect on that vacation. It could be embarrassment. Maybe we're embarrassed about something that we did, so we want to avoid the people that we did that thing around. It can be disappointment, starting a new job and feeling so disappointed with the fact that maybe that job is very similar to your last one. It can be about judgment, about fear of other people's judgment, and also judgment towards other people, like this belief that my life is better than someone else's. So I'm going to prove that by constantly growing and growing and growing, almost like I have to be productive all the time to prove that I'm not like these other people. And whenever you're trying to identify why you do this, the important part isn't deciding which one it is. It's just becoming curious enough to ask. Sometimes there's a million different reasons altogether and it's hard to dissect it all, but we can finally understand that maybe restarting every time something goes wrong is just avoidance. So whenever you're taking a look at this and understanding it a little bit better, instead of asking yourself, should I start over? Ask yourself, why do you want to start over? And get very honest with yourself. It can be so easy to, instead of reflecting and trying to understand, just look at it and be like, okay, I'm ready for change. Let's make a change. And that's great sometimes, but not all the time. Because that one question, it changes everything. Because maybe for me, whenever I was restarting my podcast in the past, my podcast wasn't the problem, but my shame was. If someone is constantly breaking up with people and getting into new relationships, maybe the relationship isn't the problem, or maybe the individual person isn't the problem. Maybe they need to go to couples therapy with the person that they're with, or maybe they need to leave that person and not get into another relationship for a long time until they understand themselves better. Maybe sometimes we're people pleasing and we're trying to do what is expected of us even if it doesn't feel right. Maybe the old routine isn't the problem. Maybe it's just that you're expecting perfection. And I think the difference isn't necessarily whether you're starting over, it's whether you've given yourself enough space to understand why you want to start over. Because sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is leave. And sometimes starting over is exactly what you need. But sometimes we're uncomfortable and we immediately want to change everything without really asking ourselves what's underneath that feeling. So instead of never starting over, instead of constantly worrying, did I do this right? Did I make the right decision? You can't change the past, so please try not to ruminate on past decisions, or if you realize in the past that it wasn't the right thing to do. You can reflect on the past and learn from that lesson and try to understand it a little bit better, but please don't stay stuck in it, ruminating in it, and feeling shameful about it. Realize that you're only human and it's very normal, and then move on, and next time try to think a little bit more about it. Next time, whenever you feel the need to restart or do something differently, it's okay to do that. And I want to make that very clear. If you want to buy a new journal because you've been exhausted and your old journal is falling apart, but next time you do it, take a pause for a second. Take a break, journal, write down what's going on, understand, process how you're feeling, and then decide. An example I have is I live in the small town that I was born in, that I've lived in my entire life. My boyfriend, my daughter, and I, we have an apartment in the small town, and it's great. I love this apartment so much. This apartment has been where our family has grown and healed, and it's been amazing. But eventually we will outgrow this apartment. Eventually things will get to a point where we need more than just a small 2-bedroom. Eventually our daughter will be at an age where maybe she doesn't want her bedroom to be right next to the living room where everyone else is at. And I don't like living in our small town. I don't hate it. It's great. It's beautiful here. But there are times where all I want is to move to the town over because it's a bigger city. I just feel happier there. I went to college there. And I have just always, my entire life, felt safer and happier in that area. And I've been recently reflecting on that a lot, on this idea that I really think we are ready, but it's not realistic right now. And I look at it right now more as like, this is something that will work out. This is something that's great. But this is something that will happen in the future. This is not something that will happen right now. This is not something that we're just going to abruptly do. We're not going to just abruptly leave this apartment and find a new one just because we want to. We are going to wait until we have enough money saved up. We're going to wait until I'm making more consistent money from this podcast and maybe from social media. And we're going to take our time. But I also know one day I want to live in an apartment in the town over because that has always been a dream of mine. I think that's a healthy way to look at it. Starting over or doing something new or moving on to another thing, it's not always a bad thing, and you don't always have to look at it as it always has to be 100% practical. It can sometimes be, this makes me genuinely happy. I will feel happier in this place. And that's a very reasonable reason. Your mental health and how you feel, that is very reasonable. But it's also reasonable to look at if you can afford it, if the move makes sense, if you're able to get people to help you with all of your stuff. It is entirely okay to dream and to do things that make you happy. What I think is worth pausing over is when you're doing it because you're trying to avoid something, you're ignoring how you feel, or you want to hurry up and move on from life, or hurry up and move on from your past. Okay, that was a bit of a shorter episode. I could sit here and talk about this for hours. I love talking about this. But for this week's journal prompt, I want you to think about the last time you wanted to start over. Again, not from shame, but just to pay attention to your patterns and ask yourself, what did you hope to fix whenever that fresh start happened? Whatever it was, even if it was something as small as buying new makeup or buying new books. Was it the situation that you were in or the way you felt in a situation? Was it that you didn't feel safe? Was it that you were just bored? Like, what was the reason that you moved on and restarted? And remember, like everything that I share in my podcast, always be kind to yourself. Whenever you're figuring these things out and learning about these things, something that I say all the time, and I actually made a post about it, self-awareness without self-compassion is self-sabotage. And keep that in your mind every time you reflect on your old patterns or your toxic patterns, or you look back at old mistakes that you've made. Always be kind to yourself. Okay, that's all for today. If something in this episode resonated, share it with a friend who needs a little reminder that they're not alone. If you want more conversations like these, be sure to follow and rate this podcast. Downloading this episode is one of the best ways to help this podcast grow, so be sure to do that. If you want to find me on social media, all of my links are in my link tree in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next Sunday.